Fuel bags seem to be all the rage lately, especially in jets where they seem to be taking over from our traditional plastic and Kevlar fuel tanks. But how are these bags replacing our tried and tested fuel systems that we all know they work, and why? Well, I genuinely knew nothing about these bags when we started filming, and that's why this is about the 5th attempt to film this video. So we're going to join all those little clip together, and together we're going to figure out how they work. Are they reliable? How do you even fill them? Are they puncture proof? Are they rupture proof? We're going to test them beyond their limits, and hopefully with that we can gain the confidence to put them in one of our own models. Let's start with why they exist though, as it's about the only point I think I know the answer to, and that's weight, and with it some reliability. Let's look at a traditional tank. It's a mostly rigid container which doesn't change shape. We have a feed line and a breather. The less fuel it contains, the more empty space or air it has inside. This leads us to needing a secondary tank, the UAT or header tank, whose sole purpose is to prevent any air bubbles reaching our engine. Even though there are all kinds of UATs, most of them rely on the same principle of sucking fuel from a fixed central point, which, as bubbles always rise to the top, no matter what position our model and UAT are in, the bubble will always be fixed towards the outside, and as such, the centre, where we're sucking fuel from, will always be bubble free, up until the UAT fills with more than 50% air, in which case everything stops working and we have a serious problem. But looking at the traditional tank setup as a whole, from experience we know that tank plus UAT works. It's nice and safe, but it's quite heavy too. We're looking at a chunk of weight for the tank, a chunk of weight for the UAT, and the weight of the extra fuel inside the UAT. It's reliable, but it's not the lightest option. And with the current 3D jet style of flying, and often a 25 kilo takeoff weight limit before needing extra paperwork, keeping weight down can be a priority. So let's compare that to the bag setup. With its floppy construction and just one feed line, it works on the principle that it gets smaller as fuel is depleted, much like a balloon. So as long as there was no air in there in the first place, you'll always have a perfect bubble-free flow of fuel. That renders the UAT unnecessary, and that just saved us a massive chunk of weight, as well as the bag itself being lighter than our traditional fuel tank. With the tanks from this example, we've just saved about ½ kilo in our model, while still maintaining or even improving the guarantee of no pesky air bubbles in our fuel line. All that weight saving is well and good, but bags are bags, and the idea of fuel bags doesn't sound as strong as a fuel tank. We need to push some of these to their limits and find out how strong they really are. First, we just need to figure out how to fill them. So for this video, we're going to be looking at the new EL Fuel Station V2 that's just been released and which conveniently comes with a few different filling modes. First impression is that it's a serious piece of kit. Contained within this handheld device is a pump already connected to the inlet-outlet Festo quick releases on the bottom. Just behind them we have the XT60 battery connector for a 2S or 3S LiPo, a rear hook to hang on our fuel can, and of course the big 3-inch screen and input buttons. So let's just get everything hooked up and we can get to blowing stuff, testing. We can get to testing. Using the EL Fuel Station V2 is quite simple. Straight out of the box we can connect a LiPo, press the button to start and again to stop, regulating the speed with the knob, and we can reverse or empty by holding the button down. This is a smart station though, and you can navigate the menus using the knob. Breaking it down, you basically have 10 model memories. Just click once to access the menu, navigate with the dial and select our model. Probably the first time you've seen a fuel station with a menu though, right? But why? As we've said, this is a smart station. It can do much more than just start and stop a fuel pump. Within any of the 10 model memories, if we click once and then press and hold, we can access the menu for that particular model memory. Here we can set the tank size, the fueling mode, be it manual, fuel switch or auto, the pump speed to avoid overpressuring our tank, and our chosen model name. Subscribe. There we go. If we select model memory number 11 and access its menu, we can change the parameters of the fuel station itself. Most importantly, the language and the size of our fuel can, as the display is going to show us not only the information for which model we've selected, the fuel in or out, pump speed, battery voltage and fuel tank fill status, it's even going to show us the remaining fuel inside our fuel can, which can be reset by clicking once with the rotary dial, then once with the on-off button, then confirming once again with the same on-off button. Going back to those fueling modes though, we can have a different mode on each model memory. But what do they all mean? One option is manual mode, which runs like a basic pump. Press once to turn on, and if you wish, you can change the pre-programmed speed with the knob. It will only stop when you press again to stop, or once it's pumped in the programmed quantity of fuel, whichever of those two happens first. This is basically what we're all used to, as it will need us to keep a close eye on our overflow, as unless the tank was empty, we'll need to manually stop the pump once it's full. Then there's fuel switch mode. This mode uses an optional fuel switch sensor, which can be installed in the model, connected to the tank's overflow or breather line. When filling, we'll temporarily connect the sensor to the side of our fuel station using the provided connector. It now basically works the same as manual mode. However, rather than us having to closely watch the overflow to manually stop filling the fuel station, it will now stop automatically as soon as the sensor detects fuel going through the breather. And finally, we have automatic mode, which doesn't require any additional accessories and actually starts by fully draining our fuel tank before fueling it up again to precisely the quantity that we've pre-programmed into it, thus providing an exactly full tank every time. For our fuel bags, this last mode sounds ideal. Fully draining the bag before precisely refilling it again to its maximum capacity. So let's give it a try and then start pushing the pressure to see if we can get our first explosive test. And this is what our setup would look like. We have our fuel can going into our fuel station, which is pumping fuel into our bag. How do we plumb our bag though? This part took me a while to get my head around, and it's part of the reason why I filmed this part of the video about 5 times. Let's look at the bag first though. Basically we have one fuel line which is connected to our clunk, which goes to our turbine, and let's call it a breather valve, which is stuck normally at the top. Now, unlike in conventional tanks, the breather valve must be closed for flying. Think of the bag as a balloon. We put fuel into the balloon and the balloon gets bigger. There's no air inside it. And as we use fuel, the balloon is simply collapsing in on itself, but there's still no air inside. If we left the breather valve open, then air could get in and it would be not particularly good. So, how can we make the connections? There are basically 2 ways. It also kind of depends on how you want to be filling your bag, whether with a standard forwards backwards pump or inserting an exact precise amount of fuel into it. So, in one situation where we're using a normal pump, basically we would connect it to the breather valve. That way, when you're putting fuel in, it doesn't matter which one you use, any air will rise to the top, and then with that standard pump going backwards, sucking back out again, it would in theory suck out all of that air from the top. And once you see clean fuel coming back to your pump, you know that you've sucked out all of that pesky air. The alternative that we're using is we're going to drain the bag and then fill it up with a precise amount of fuel. Now in this case, it's important that the bag is empty before we start. And the best way to empty the bag is basically using the system which is designed to do exactly that, the clunk. So in this case, rather than connecting to our breather, we're going to be connecting to our main fuel line, which we need to use a T-piece so it can go both to our engine and to our pump. In this case, we'll normally keep our valve closed for the breather and we'll simply suck out the fuel, then put it back in again. If there was any air stuck in there, that's why we have this little valve here, which allows us just to allow that little top bit of air to spurt out. So let's test it out. First of all, let's set up this model memory for this particular bag. So, first of all, the capacity. Even though it says that it's 1 litre, having tested it, it's actually 1.6 litres. So let's just increase that to 1.6. I have to have a word with Carlos about his measuring methods. And fueling mode, we're going to change it from manual. As we said, we're going to go to automatic so that it will fully drain and then insert those 1.6 litres. There we go, setup done, everything's connected, breather valves closed, and start. So first of all, it's going to suck out all the fuel back into our jerry can. It also tells us how much fuel has been taken out, so we know if we were right on the limit of running out of fuel on that last flight, or if we can increase our timer because we had loads left over. So it should suck this pretty much completely dry, which in fairness, it's doing a heck of a good job. It's going to start sucking, yeah, struggling now. It's going to stop any second. I'll tell you what, that is empty. So that's a really good sign. And now, in theory, the easy part, it should now put in exactly 1.6 litres of fuel. 160, 170, 190, so about 10%. You can see it filling up. We can see there are a couple of small air bubbles in there, which we'll try and get out later through the breather valve. We've got half a litre. We can actually increase the speed as well, even though it's set in the program, if for any reason you wanted to go quicker or slower. 950, 970, 1 litre. So that's in theory the designated capacity, but you can see that's still very soft. A lot more capacity available. Starting to fill up nicely. 1400. The pump slows down when it's reaching the end. And there we are at 1600. Realistically, we could probably still increase that a little bit more if we wanted to, but we don't need it to be completely taut. What have we got? We've got 2 or 3 small little bubbles in there, which if we were to open this, they should fly out, basically. As you can see, like that. And that gives us one completely full bag of fuel without any air in it. Good to go. The fact that the pump and the bag worked wasn't really a surprise, it was expected. However, what happens if you try and put too much fuel in? What kind of tolerances or limits are there for a given bag? Does it explode? Does it expand? Is it when you go over a little, or is it when you go over a lot? We need to know this, so it may not be scientific, but let's find out what it takes, or if we even can, blow up a bag. So, first of all, let's increase the capacity of this particular bag. We know it's roughly 1600. Let's go absolutely overkill and say, okay, sure, it's 3 litres. So there's no chance, in theory, that you can get 3 litres into a 1.6 litre bag, surely. So that's done. And as I don't particularly want to be picking up kerosene for the next month from everywhere in my workshop, let's just put that in here, where hopefully any ruptures don't get us all covered in kerosene. And go. So same as before, it's going to empty out the bag so it's completely empty, and then it's going to try and insert those 3 litres of kerosene into this particular bag. There we go, so it's empty. Now the fun really begins. How much fuel is going to fit in the bag? Is it going to hold? Is it going to burst? Or when is it going to burst? Quick, let me know in the comments below. We'll see if you get it right. My guess, I'm probably going to say it's going to be okay for another 300 millis. So if we call it, I'm saying it's going to explode at about 2 litres. And no, when it gets closer to 2 litres, I'm not going to be leaning over it. Okay, so at 625, we're a litre short of its official capacity. Well, its official capacity according to Carlos is 1 litre, but that's about half full. So the 1.6 litres that do fit in it normally, we are at 1 litre now. Bag's still quite soft, obviously, it's not even full yet. 1.2. You can tell that as we got all the air out on the last attempt, the bag is pretty much already air free. So it seems that it shouldn't be an issue every single flight or fuel bag to make sure that all the air is out. It actually stays air free. Okay, 1.6 litres. So the bag's now at what I've considered it to be capacity, 1.7. It's starting to get rather tight now. This is probably when I'm going to start pulling fully faces. Okay, that's okay, so that's 2 litres, and that's really, oh dear, that's really tight. Oh, I don't like this bit. Don't want to get my watch wet. 2.3. I'm going to get wet. I don't want to get wet. 2.4, 2.5. That's a litre over. And we're done. 2.6 litres. And it's gone absolutely everywhere. Great. I hope you enjoyed that, because I've got a load of cleaning up now. And we're done. 2.6 litres. To the next test. This time we're going to try and test how puncture proof or resistant a bag is when it's full of kerosene. So first of all, we need to fill it up. We've put it back into automatic mode, so it's going to try and suck out any fuel, if there was any. This one's a brand new bag, and it's now going to fill it up once again with that exact 1.5 litres, the same capacity as the bag itself. So we're not going to over pressurize this one. This one's more of a simulation of day-to-day flying with a little bit of rubbing maybe on a former, maybe on a landing gear, maybe on some other component surrounding the fuel tank or fuel bag itself. So we've got our bag full of kerosene. Let's just ignore the air for now. It's a different kind of test. We want to test just how resistant the bag is. So test number one, just a standard former. So got a piece of wood with some jagged edges on it. Okay, so we've not punctured it, although we have marked the top layer. Now the bag is made out of, it's 2 layers, this particular one. So even if we have cut through the top layer there, the second layer should, in theory, keep it steady. We can see that it's still holding its shape and pressure. So that test, obviously, scientific, probably not. How about something equally not scientific? Screwdriver. It's got a bit of a point on it. I mean, we're not trying to, obviously, if I were to go straight like that, we'll go straight through. But bearing in mind this is pressurized, not bad for a plastic bag, I guess. How about another screwdriver? This one's a flat head, but it's a lot sharper. Go for broke. Don't hit yourself in the face. One more. Okay, so the bag itself seems quite puncture resistant, and you would think as well that the more fuel you use in flight, the more resistant it'll be. At the moment, it's quite blown up, which means there's a lot of tension in there, and it would be quite easy to cut it with, say, a knife or something like that. But as far as semi-sharp objects casually flying into it, or a little bit of rubbing from a lump of wood, it seems relatively resistant. I mean, obviously, if it was rubbing on the same place flight after flight after flight, I would imagine that it would eventually cut through. But there again, maintenance, checking it up, making sure, especially after the first flight, that there's no damage. I mean, you can see, I'm not sure if you can see on the video there, but you can see quite obviously where it's been scratched. It's got a kind of sandpaper look to it. So if you were to do a first test flight, pull the bag out, you should be able to see, I would think, quite easily if it's been rubbing anywhere. And the final test, purely for violence sake, blade, plastic bag, is it going to hold up? No, it's going to go straight through. Just like that. Surprisingly though, because there are multiple layers in here, that's actually only punctured the outer layer. On this particular bag, it's made out of 2 layers on either side, so that wouldn't have ruptured the bag, interestingly. That is surprising. So I still can't reach the fuel or the clunk, even though I can put my finger inside the bag. Obviously, different surface tensions among the layers helps you there. So yeah, that has surprised me. Obviously, if you try and go through harder, you will go through more layers. But I mean, that's sharp. Anyway, time for some conclusions, I think. Otherwise, this is going to be a really long video. First thing that we've learned is if you're going to make anything explode with liquid, put the lid on the can. It's taken me a long time to tidy up here. That was not good. Back to the tank though. I would say that it's super important to either have one of these or something similar. The fuel station from Smokey L really helped to get the fuel in and out properly. Let me clarify this. The bags, you can feel how full they are, but depending on how you feel them, you're never going to know exactly how full they are. That means, as we saw in the video, we put almost, I think it was almost a litre over capacity, and the bag was still okay before it ruptured. That means you could easily put in a lot more fuel for any given flight, or more dangerously, a lot less fuel for any given flight. Now, if you've got a bit more fuel and the model's a bit heavier, well, fine. But if you think you've got a full tank of gas and for some reason that day when you felt it, it wasn't quite as full as usual, but you thought it was, you could all too easily run out of fuel. So I would say 10 out of 10 there for this. Onto the bags themselves, I'll admit that I'm actually quite impressed. Yes, they're plastic bags, but they're a lot stronger than I thought they were going to be going into this. The fact that it could inflate as it did with so much fuel inside and not explode for another litre, I find impressive. The fact that you can cut into it and you're only cutting the top layer, you're not cutting into the centre middle layer where the fuel is, at least not immediately, also feels impressive. The whole idea of saving around half a kilo to 3/4 of a kilo, depending on the size of model it's going into, for 3D jets like this one, that sounds super interesting. So all in all, I'm impressed with the bags. At the moment, the FC1 is being built. It's almost finished. That video is going to be out really soon, so make sure you're subscribed for that one. But at the moment, that's got the standard setup. However, once we get it flying, most certainly we'll be getting a bag in there and we're putting it on weight reduction. So we'll likely be removing the brakes, changing the wheels, and doing all the stuff that I usually do to my 3D jets to get them lighter. So, bags for the win. Who'd have thought it? Hope you learned something in this video. I know it was a pain to film, but I'm really pleased to have been able to have the time and the opportunity to do all these tests. Thank you as well to Carlos from CM Jets for providing me with so many bags to basically destroy and figure out exactly how they work for myself and for all you guys out there. So send him some love, leave us a like, subscribe if you aren't already. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this video and other videos that could be coming like it, and I'll see you all in the next one.